what I've come to appreciate is the fact that my personal journey, while it's been, filled with, challenge and adversity, I wouldn't trade it for anything else. To be able to come as an undocumented child to experience the kind of access and opportunity that I had, to now live the way that I live, by every measure, whether it's, social, economic, I've achieved the American dream, right? And within that lies this tremendous responsibility and obligation to make that real for the next generation.
Hello, welcome to We're the Leaders We're Looking For, a podcast from United Way of the Wine Country, produced with tech support and direction from Brant Hokinga and Tiv Branding. We are here to share the voices of our neighbors, change makers, and everyday leaders who are building a region rooted in belonging, resilience, and justice. And I'm Lisa Carreño. I'm President and CEO of United Way of the Wine Country. Thanks for joining us. And let's get started. Native American wisdom teaches deep respect for the earth, all living beings, and our interconnectedness. It reminds us that we each carry responsibility for how we show up in the community and in the world. The Hopi Elders' message from June 8, 2000 calls us to remember our power. We shape the reality we live in, and we each have a role in creating a more compassionate and just future. Hopi elders provide this prophecy for a new millennia. You have been telling people that this is the 11th hour. Now you must go back and tell people that this is the hour, and that there are things to be considered. Where are you living? What are you doing? What are your relationships? Are you in right relation? Where is your water? Know your garden. It is time to speak your truth. Create your community. Be good to each other, and do not look outside yourself for your leader. This could be a good time. There is a river flowing now, very fast. It is so great and swift that there are those who will be afraid. They will try to hold on to the shore. They will feel they are being torn apart and will suffer greatly. Know the river has its destination. The elders say we must let go of the shore. Push off into the middle of the river. Keep our eyes open and our heads above the water. And I say, see who is in there with you and celebrate. At this time in history, we are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. For the moment that we do, our spiritual growth and journey come to a halt. The time of the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and your vocabulary. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration. We are the ones we've been waiting for. As we continue season 1 of We're the Leaders We're Looking For, the wisdom of the Hopi elders offers a grounding reminder. The leadership we seek is already alive within us. Our season so far has been a journey into this truth, an unfolding portrait of what courage, heart-centered leadership looks like across our diverse North Bay community. In our first conversations, Jay Molyneux, Lori Fong, and Herman G. Hernandez each illuminated essential dimensions of this inner leadership. Jay reminded us of the quiet courage of service and the steadying force of tending to the community. Lori offered the deep cultural wisdom, compassion, and steadfast presence that collectively help young people and all of us remember who we are. Herman expanded our understanding of representation, curiosity, and the bravery required every day to build belonging, redress harm, and speak truth with love. Together, their voices have helped form a rich, multidimensional portrait of leadership rooted in connection, purpose, and justice. In this episode, Oscar Chavez, President and CEO of the Community Foundation Sonoma County, adds a powerful new thread. Oscar broadens our understanding of generosity, inviting us to see it not as an occasional act, but as a daily relational practice that shapes how we need to hold one another always, and especially now as we experience times of uncertainty, chaos, and rupture. Oscar's reflections challenge us to explore and live into a profound question. How can we create the conditions for more love to emerge? With Oscar's contribution, Season 1 continues to reveal the leaders we are and the leaders we are becoming. These conversations affirm that leadership is not a title or a position. Leadership is a practice, awakened through love, generosity, courage, and our shared commitment to community. Thanks for joining us once again, and please pardon the brief background buzz you'll hear around 50 minutes in. A small reminder that even in deep conversation, life continues bustling around us. We'll be sure to silence devices going forward. Welcome, Oscar Chavez. It is so nice to sit down and have this conversation with you. Thank you for being a part of We're the Leaders We're Looking For today.
Yeah, and thank you, Lisa, for the invitation. When I mentioned to you that I had listened to one of the podcasts and you invited me, I was so grateful that you extended that invitation. And
Absolutely.
So it's truly an honor to spend time with you and to just have a conversation about, why we care so deeply about this community.
Well, I'm grateful for the opportunity to sit down and have this kind of conversation with you. When we first met years ago, you were the executive director of Community Action Partnership Sonoma County. Today, you are the CEO of the Community Foundation Sonoma County. I know a little bit about your background, but I'd be very grateful for you to share a bit about your journey and what story of your life particularly reminds you why you do this work.
Great, thank you for that. I think my story is very similar to the thousands and thousands of immigrants that come to this country to seek a better life and better opportunity that is just really difficult in their country of origin. And my father in the 70s would come to the United States and work for about 7 months and then go back. And over time, it just became much more difficult to make that, to travel without documentation. And he decided to stay and save some money. And then my mother joined him. And 2 years later, they saved some more money and were able to bring my sister and I to the United States. So, our experience is of moving to the Central Valley to a farming community as undocumented individuals really having to live in the shadows of community and society, because the kind of fear that a lot of our immigrants are feeling today, we felt that back in the 80s, and it was real. I remember my father driving my mother to the fields in the dark, like at 3 a.m, to avoid checkpoints, and she would have to, sit in the dark for a couple hours until the rest of the workers came here. And that's the kind of reality that undocumented people experience. And, that experience, shaped the way I saw the world. It shaped the way I felt about my position in, my community, my school. And it wasn't always pleasant. And I quickly learned that, our construct or the system that we live in is not designed for people like us. And so we have to learn to navigate it in different ways. And through that experience, I saw immense generosity of people extending support to myself, my family. And that's really, back to your question about what's the one thing that has shaped or informed your work today, and that is the immense capacity that people have to be generous towards others. And so I've really framed the way that I do my work and see the world from this place of love and generosity, that there are no limits to that, although we live in a world where we often see things in very finite terms, right? There's just not enough. Well, there's always enough love, and there's always enough generosity. And I was the beneficiary of that as I was growing up, and it really had profound impacts on me.
You want to share?
Sure.
You want a couple of stories?
Absolutely. So, coming from what I would now consider extreme poverty, but when you're in poverty and in the community, it's all relative, right? I didn't feel poor when I lived in Mexico because we were all in the same situation. In fact, there was a greater sense of abundance. People looked out for each other. There was that mutual support. But coming here, you really begin to feel different, and others begin to other you. But I remember going to school. I came here in July, and I went to school for the first time, and I thought that I had gone to heaven. To step into this classroom with so many colors all over the walls and crayons and books, and I just couldn't believe that there was just so much stuff that I could look at, read, use. And then I went to the cafeteria, and there was lunch, right? That there was a lunch that was provided. And I just thought that was just incredible, right? That I'm coming to a school where there's all these things that just stimulate, kids, and there's colors and crayons, and then they feed you, and then there's playground equipment. And I was just so struck by all of that, and how nice people were. And I remember in that, it was third grade, we had an opportunity to take a field trip to a zoo. And on that field trip, my parents, we didn't have any resources, any money, and low-income children who are on the free lunch program get their paper bag for lunch. And I remember we were getting ready to leave, and there was an opportunity for the kids to go into the gift shop to buy things. And I just was sitting by the bench by myself, and my third grade teacher came up and started talking to me. Her name's Mrs. Frazier, and she asked me, she spoke Spanish, and she asked me if I was going to go in and buy anything. And I said no. And she asked why. And it was hard for me to say, I don't have any money. And she just reached into her pocket and offered me a few bucks to go in and buy I remember buying 2 pencils. And that just act of kindness and generosity made me feel like the rest of the kids. It was very impactful for me. Or when she would recognize the things that I was doing by doing a little certificate of achievement, and those things just meant so much for me, and to see my parents just light up that I was doing well, just felt really, really good. And it doesn't end there. I can tell you stories of when my father got a job on the farm, and we had an opportunity to move to this farm. They had I think 8 homes for farm workers. So there was farm worker housing, and the owner of the farm and his wife were just tremendously generous individuals. They really treated everybody on the farm as an extension of their family. They would provide gifts for the kids. So we never really felt different. And I just thought that was such an incredible act for somebody to, see others as equals and not as, their workforce or less than. And those things shape the way you look at the world. I think that I've been there's a term called, if you're a good student of your students, if you're a good student of your student, means that you're observing. And I think I've always been a good observer of just observing leadership and other people, and try to emulate all those things that really stand out for me and their qualities. And Richard and Sue were certainly 2 of those individuals. I remember I didn't, I was 13, didn't have a work permit, but I was able to do work around the farm. And, I remember getting paid, and he would always ask me about how I was doing in school. And he would challenge the kids that if you got straight A's, he would reward you. And they would invite us into their homes. And, when I remember when I was turning 13 years old, he had asked me, well, what are you going to do for your 13th birthday? You're a teenager. And at that time, I don't even think I knew or understood what the word meant. And I said, well, I'm not doing anything. And he said, well, we're going to throw you a party. Being 13 is a big deal. And so he opened up his home, and we invited family, and we had a big barbecue. And it was just such a nice experience that we had celebrating my birthday. And for him to be able to create that experience, for them, it was not about taking the role of my parents, but really being a supporter. And they were clear, like, your parents work super hard, and whatever we can do to help, it was important to them. And so that kind of generosity, of doing things for others, of helping people, just, has been such a core component of the way that I, see the world, the way that I show up in spaces. And of just being a good human, just this idea that, life is already complicated enough. And if we can be better, not just for ourselves, but for our family, our neighbors, that in and of itself can be really transformative if you're trying to do community work.
Absolutely. I appreciate so much how what you've described in Mrs. Fraser and in the couple that owned the farm, how they saw you and they saw your family and recognized that choosing to come from a place of kindness and sharing what they had, was was it just seemed to come naturally, because you were a part of them, Mrs. Fraser and the couple. You all were a part of them, and yeah, there was no separation.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that. Through that process, I just developed like immense love and appreciation for the two of them, and it was kind of a full circle experience a number of years ago when I was on the school board for the Windsor Unified School District, and I was attending a conference, and I was talking about the Portrait of Sonoma report, and my third grade teacher showed up to hear my presentation, and she was so proud of what I had accomplished, and she herself had become the county superintendent of schools in Kern County.
Wow!
And so we just shared this incredible reunion, and it just provided another opportunity for me to thank her and to communicate how the love she expressed for me as a kid who just, had come from Mexico. I couldn't speak a word of English, but I felt her love and her generosity, and that was, life-changing. And to be able to thank her for that was just such a joy for me.
I bet. That's really special. That's really special. I'm glad you guys had that moment. Have you had that with the farm couple too?
I have. I consider them like my second set of parents, and I can point to people throughout my life who've really shaped who I am, and Mrs. Fraser and Richard and Sue Freeborn, and with them, with the people who own the farm, they created opportunities for me to see a completely different world, a world of privilege that they were able to live in, that I only saw in movies, right? So they were generous enough to bring my sister and I, and sometimes other kids, on their family vacations.
Wow.
So we would go to the beach. They rented a beach house. They had a big RV, and they had these toys and quads, things that we never imagined we would participate. And, that gave me this desire to really to do more. Like, could I achieve this and do great things? And they were very supportive. And I remember when I turned 16 years old, he asked me if I was going to get my driver's license. And I said, well, I want to, but, we don't have car insurance, and you have to have car insurance. And a few days later, he told me, well, go make your appointment to get your license, and I'm going to take you. And I said, well, thank you so much, And so, this farm that we lived on was about, a 30, 40-minute drive into town. And so he took me to this appointment, and he was a big guy. He was, very large and very tall. And I remember him, getting out of the car in cowboy boots, and he said, Oscar, this was about 11. He's like, I'm going to walk down to the Shafter Motel and get a drink. When you're done and you pass your exam, come and pick me up. And I froze and panicked, and I said, Richard, what if I fail? And he said, listen, I know I can walk there. I can't walk back, so you better not fail. I didn't fail. I got my license, and it was only because he took me that I was able to do that. And so, they were such a big part of our lives. They went to my, elementary school, my junior high graduation. They came to my high school graduation. They, came to our wedding and our college graduation. So these are folks that became family, right? I just became an extension of a much larger family, and so they were just instrumental in helping me see things, and I think more importantly to make me feel like I could belong, right? Because society does a really good job about othering people that don't look like them or they're not from the same social economic background, and they help to really normalize and give me the kind of confidence that I think every young kid needs, certainly a teenager needs. And so I credit them for just being so instrumental in shaping my adolescence. And then, I went to high school and we moved away from the farm and settled in the housing projects in Shafter. And not because we wanted to, but because circumstances, didn't provide other opportunities. And that too was challenging and difficult. And around that time, we were in the process of gaining legal status through the amnesty program that President Reagan passed in 1986. And so it wasn't until my junior year of high school that I was considered a permanent legal resident, which meant that you were eligible to access government services. Before then, you couldn't. You couldn't get any medical services, any kind of food assistance. And so we just relied on the generosity of our neighbors and the seasonality of, when work was good, and when things were tough. But through that high school experience, once I became a permanent legal resident, I met this director from a program called Career Beginnings, and her name was Rita Martinez. She was the program director, and this was a program that was designed to support first-generation college students, focusing on identifying low-income and immigrant children to go to the university. And this was a summer program that was funded by at that time it was the JTPA, which is now we called WIOA. And I knew nothing about the program. I always avoided applying for any program because my parents said, "Listen, you don't have your Social Security number is not real, so you can't apply for any of those programs." And so I just avoided them. But she came out and spoke to students and said, "Hey, we've got this program. It's designed to bring kids onto the university campus," which I had never been to a university campus. And if you're selected to join the program, you'll go to school for 4 hours and you work for 4 hours and you get paid for the entire 8 hours. And I thought that was a joke. Like literally, seriously, you're going to pay me to go to school and to work in an air-conditioned office? Like, to me, that was, I just couldn't believe it, because I was working in the fields with my mom, and Kern County is really hot, and it's really hard work. So I signed up, and I was selected to be part of this program. They bused us to the university, and I'd never been to a university campus. And the most interesting part of that experience was when I got to meet the president of the university, which happened to be a Latino. And I just honestly never imagined that was possible, right? This idea of seeing Latino professionals. You could have said, "Hey, we're going to go see a unicorn," right? Because at the time, the people that we were around were very hardworking people. My parents, they worked really hard. They provided such an incredible life for us, but they were not in the professional class. I didn't know who the chief of police. I didn't know the elected officials. I didn't know professionals. We just knew the people that we lived in, around the housing projects.
Right.
And so to hear the story of this president and to, signal that, hey, you can be like me. Like you could be president of the university. Like that was just so eye-opening. And it was very impactful. And I mean, I also credit this program and programs like this that really take young people out of their environment and put them in places of possibility. I mean, they are life-changing. And that was certainly the case for me. So after the summer, there was an opportunity to select a small group of participants to do a 22-day Outward Bound experience. And if you've heard of Outward Bound, it's a program to really help young people cope and deal with challenges, but also as a way for even older people to overcome adversity or challenges or to grow in leadership. And so I was selected to do that. I'd never been camping before. I had no camping equipment, but again, through the generosity and donors who contributed, I had this incredible opportunity with 6 other of my peers to do this 22-day Outward Bound experience. And that was just life-changing. It was life-changing because, I never saw myself as a leader. In high school. In fact, I did everything to be seen, to not to be seen, right? I didn't want to draw attention, again, because of our legal status. And so I was almost like a ghost, or just a shadow, passing through. And so I never, believed that I could be, a leader. But that experience just changed me. I remember that I got hurt along the way. I think I hyperextended my knees. And at the end of that 22 days, they began to break up the groups by ability. Like if they're really super athletic people, they get to do the long hike. And because I was injured, there were other participants who were also injured, but they made me the leader of that group. And I remember like being a little upset, like, no, I want to go with those other groups. I can do it. But I had this other job that I had to do, and I think the first night I was upset and I was pushing the group a little too much, and we had to stop and set up for camp. And that experience just taught me so much about myself, right? About, one, seeing myself as a leader, but this recognition that with that comes tremendous responsibility. Like if we don't stop and set up camp, it's going to be much more difficult for us as a group. And I can't let these folks down. Right. So this idea of now, you've got responsibilities for a group, you can't let them down. And I tell you, I came back to high school, to my senior year, a very different person, a much more confident person. Somebody that I maybe didn't even recognize. It's wow, what happened to you? And it was incredible. But Rita, the program director, she was able to see something in me that I could not see in myself. And that led to, goodness, a 10-year working relationship with her. She was not only my mentor, but someone that was just so important in my life, who, at one point, put her own career on the line and advocated for me and fought for me. And she was the kind of individual that would, take us to these conferences that were designed around youth development and engaging, young people, high school students. And I remember being in a room full of professionals, people with PhDs, and I, rarely said anything. And she was the kind of person that would put you on the spot, and she would say, "Oscar, you're a young person. Like, we're all talking about you. Like, how is this landing? Does it make sense? Does it resonate with you?" And she just forced me to engage. Like, she thrusted me into conversation. And it was through those experiences that I began to gain the confidence that, yeah, I can do this. Like, I have something to say. I have a point of view. People are reacting to what I'm saying. But had it not been for her and for her ability to see my potential, I don't think that I could have done what I am doing now without her. Yeah. Without her support, including just, creating opportunities. I remember that, she left the university to become a dean at a community college. And I was recently married, and she said, "Hey, we've got a job for you." I'm like, "Well, I can't move. I just got married." And she's like, "Well, we got a job for you. You can't refuse." And it was an offer I couldn't refuse, right? And so she just believed in me and believed in my potential, and just helped to accelerate my career and just open the kinds of doors that folks with privilege have an easier time opening, but those that have very limited networks find it really challenging, to access. And so I learned so much from those experiences that really now inform and help me to think about, what am I doing to open opportunities for others, and what can I do to make it easier for others to accelerate it or to see themselves when they might not, see that potential in themselves. And so in a way, I'm reliving and paying forward all of those things that I benefited from, right? This idea that that we get to where we are because we've had tremendous help and support. I really believe that, right? Perhaps there are really exceptional people that don't need any help, but my experience and my observation is that we get to where we are because of the kindness, generosity, and support of others. And I try to do what I can, to pay it forward and to do and emulate all of the greatness that I observed as a young person and as a young professional.
It's beautiful. I love how in sharing these stories, you're helping to expand the definition of generosity, beyond financial support, to kindness and sharing resources and sharing opportunities and acts of love, belief, the power of belief, of somebody else having faith in you and believing in you when you are struggling to believe in yourself or don't even realize that you deserve to believe in yourself. Insisting on effort and success so that you begin to expect that of yourself too. That as an act of generosity is transformational. It is transformational.
No, absolutely. Somebody had once asked me, or it was a conversation about, belonging and how do we help people feel like they belong. And the comment was really around, well, we have all of these opportunities and like we're doing everything we can to help people belong. And the question was, well, how do we help people belong, right? And it's a simple question, yet it's so difficult to respond to. And what I came to in answering the question was my own experience. Like, when did I feel like I belonged? And I remember this this transformation I had when I no longer felt like a client, right, or like a case, because as families who are in need and who are needing to access services, we're giving labels, like I was a at-risk student, I was a migrant, high risk, whatever. We were just giving labels. But, I've come now to realize that, I was not the labels that people gave me. Right. My family, we were not the labels that people gave us. The harsh reality is that, we weren't broken. We were just broke. Mm-hmm. Yet we were treated, different because we were a case or a client. Mm-hmm. And as I began to navigate and go to school and gain a confidence, there was a point in time where I no longer felt like a client, but I felt like a peer. And I liken that to this sense of belonging, right? Mm-hmm. Is that it is both the way you internalize your experience in the world and the way that other people treat you. Mm-hmm. And there came this moment where, like, I shed that client mentality, and I had the confidence to really, like, show up in the world as someone who had something to contribute. Mm-hmm. And that's really important, right? Because words matter. The way that we invite people into either conversation or into an experience really, really matters. And so how we engage and how we talk about the idea of belonging really matters, mm-hmm. right? And so to me, I'm always trying to find ways of helping people really understand that felt sense of belonging, because there are people who just look, this society was made just for them, right? Mm-hmm. So they don't know any different. Mm-hmm. But for a lot of us, we struggle through it and we find our way, and it's not easily seen. Mm-hmm. And so if we can help sort of eliminate that or close that gap and bring more people along, I think we'll begin to really create, I think, more inclusive communities, the kinds of communities that we seek to create here in our own backyard.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I sense behind what you've just shared, creating the conditions for belonging, that an invisible force that holds relations together is trust. And I'm not sure that there's a strong sense of trust when one person sees themselves as like the provider and the other person sees themselves as provided for. That the power differential there doesn't lend itself to a sense of trust and trust building that leads to the connective tissue of belonging.
You're absolutely right, Lisa. I think that is something that is often overlooked, this idea of, who holds the power in the relationship. Mm. And I guess in a way, that construct is really something that I've been, fighting against, because I think it doesn't serve mm-hmm. Anybody, mm-hmm. right? What serves us is when we see ourselves as equals in the work or in the relationship or in the way that we contribute to society or to community. And so this idea of normalizing that is so incredibly important, mm-hmm. because of what I've been saying, right? That look, when you are being othered, like you feel it, like you can see through the BS, right? Even when people say, "Yeah, we're creating the conditions for you to belong," but if you don't feel it, like your gut does not lie to you, and so I think part of what I've been trying to do through the work that I've been trying to do is to help to normalize that, right? Even, when I came here working at Community Action Partnership, we served a lot of immigrant communities, primarily Mexican immigrants. And it was really, really important, right, that we engaged and we supported families, not from this place of, look what we're doing, to you or for you, but to really create the conditions to help families grow in their own leadership, right? Like we have agency, everybody has agency. So how do we create the conditions for that to emerge and for parents to feel what it's like to be the primary educator of their children, to feel like, hey, this is my role, this is what I do, and I'm supported to do that, not to relegate that responsibility, but to say I am the parent, I'm the provider, and I'm helping my children and my family, or for a father who's a provider, or a mother who's a provider, right? I think how you create the conditions for that to happen is so incredibly important, and the way that you talk about the services that you are that you're delivering, or that how you invite families to shape those services is just really, really important. And through that, you learn a lot of lessons. And for me, going back to my own experience of saying that, look, we were not broken, but the system, because of the limited tools they have, like we can only help those that are broken, or if you don't fit this criteria, we can't help you. We're not really helping community, right? Because it was just not designed to help people who need just a little assistance. And I would argue today that the kind of safety net that we have today is more whole than net. And so I've always been curious about, what would it take to create the kind of responsive safety net that really recognizes that, the kind of the adversity that people experience is, and people may disagree with me, but it's shaped by, external forces that oftentimes are beyond their control. And we have to see that, whether it's the kind of, economic system that we're living in that creates, so much poverty, or the kind of policies that we advance that favor groups over another. I think that anybody who's in the business of community building needs to just recognize the power that policies and practices and historical things that we've done, how that has shaped the way communities and people evolved. And a good example of that is in the nonprofit world, a lot of the funding that we get is designed to address the symptoms of poverty, but rarely does it get to addressing the root causes of poverty. And so for me, that has been an area of immense interest. How do we move beyond addressing the urgent services? Like, they're important, right? But how do we get to investing in the vital conditions for community well-being? And I think that's a conversation that we all should be having. How much should go into the criminal justice system versus in guaranteeing that everybody has access to quality preschool education, or that families have jobs that allow them to support their family, that provide the kind of discretionary income to create meaningful opportunities for their children. And so I've been in this pursuit of moving away from the addressing the symptoms and thinking about what are root cause solutions that in the long run are going to benefit our community and our society. And I think that's been the through line of my career, working at Community Action Partnership and then working at the county as the largest investor of the safety net, of leading the upstream investments initiative to prioritize prevention as the best and superior growth model of lifting up programs that are helping people become better off and that invite the participation of diverse groups, entities, whether it's business, government, philanthropy, to shape that in a way that's going to bring the best of our thinking, the best of our investment for the betterment of our community.
What practices help you stay rooted in your values when the world seems overwhelming or feels overwhelming?
It's a really good question. I think we're all feeling a little overwhelmed, and I think what keeps me grounded has been, the way that I see the world, right? And I'm a servant leader, right? So I have this strong ethos or belief that to lead you must serve, and that you must serve in the interest of others and to better community, and so it's always been important to be very consistent and persistent in my leadership, right? So I really try to honor that and also recognize that what is real and what is a construct, right? So the kinds of policy shifts that we're seeing have changed. The construct has changed. But what has remained real is the kind of love that people feel, the fear, the kindness that we observe. And so that sort of becomes the grounding component, right? Is that, look, we're always gonna experience challenges and hardships, but if we stick to what is real and what is true, and if you don't deviate from that path or how you approach the problem or the world, there's a lot of peace and comfort in leading in that way, right? Because the problems, may stay the same, but they just take, different form or different shape. But for me, I think being grounded in what is real and recognizing that is really where we should be focusing our energy, right? Into making things better for people and to improving the human condition, to advance the human potential. That's the stuff that gets me up every day,
Yeah.
That's the fire in my belly.
Yeah.
If we can make our communities better for the next generation, I don't think there's a greater cause than that.
Yeah. Yeah. How does my commitment to love and kindness help me advance human potential?
Yeah.
That's that's a really lovely wake-up call.
Yeah,
each morning to greet the day.
If you think about it, like, what is the purpose of humanity, right? If not to preserve life, to make us a better species, to make us better people, and to be kinder, to be better for each other. I guess we're using all of these words, but at the end of the day, it goes back to what you were talking about. This is really about love. Right. And how can we create the conditions for more love to emerge that can help bridge a lot of the gaps, the misunderstandings, the challenges that we're dealing with?
I love that question.
You know,
How can we create the conditions for more love to emerge?
yeah.
That really could have a whole big conversation about that. Just that question alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just observing how we're organized as communities.
Yeah.
Like what can we do to create more bumping spaces for people that normally don't come together?
Yeah.
Here in Sonoma County, or every town USA, we're bifurcated along race and class, or generational isolation.
Yeah.
And so we have to be intentional about creating those conditions if we want an outcome that promotes, greater belonging, greater inclusiveness, greater, stronger, community engagement. Those things you have to work for.
Right. Yeah, they don't just happen.
They just don't happen.
They really don't just happen. What have you learned to love, even when it was hard to?
Well, boy, that's a really profound question. I guess what comes to mind is I've learned to love myself. I think that, growing up and just trying to navigate the world, I've often, thought that I didn't quite achieve, or that I didn't do as well as I should have. And I think in retrospect, I was probably hard on myself. And I think a lot of immigrants just experience that sort of internalized depression.
Yeah.
And where we feel like we're less than, and we find ourselves in boardrooms or places where we question, like, why are we here? And so, I guess for me, I've learned to love and forgive myself, and to celebrate what I've been able to do and what I am going to continue to do, and to share that, right? Because I think that could be hard for a lot of people, right? To experience just self-love.
Absolutely. We're not conditioned to think about how we love ourselves, or that we should love ourselves, or that we're worthy. Everything around us tells us we're not.
Yeah, and I think when we can do that, it's much easier to love others, right? So I've learned to love myself, and I've learned to love and just appreciate people. I think we're in the business of improving the lives of individuals, so you've got to love people, right? And I just love seeing the joy in folks when they're having success, or when they overcome a challenge or an obstacle, or when you hear a comment from a young person that says, hey, 3 years ago you said this for me, or to me, or you helped me get this job, or you set me up with this interview. That's pure joy to know that your small part helped to shape somebody's life, just like I benefited from all the generosity of others. So I love people. I love to help, and to be in the thick of making communities better places.
What's a moment when you had to speak truth to power?
I think there's been a lot of moments throughout the years and throughout my career. And I think what's important here is less about the individual moment, but more about like how have those moments shaped the way that I show up in those times, right? Because it's very easily to get upset or to, your instinct is to fight, or to just come back and challenge, whatever that individual said or and where I've landed or where I've come to is rather than confronting that from this place, well, now I gotta fight. I've landed on this place of trying to listen to the perspective of the other, of trying to seek greater understanding of that perspective of, why is it that this individual thinks so differently than I do? Or what's the story behind that comment that was just made? And so the exciting part for me is to sort of seek that understanding. And what I have found is that when I've confronted, or spoken truth to power, when I have created the conditions to open up a conversation, I have grown as an individual, and I believe that I have probably helped shaped or helped that individual think differently about that issue. And I think that's how we create greater understanding, right? And so I find now, I have many more tools to at my disposal when I think about speaking truth to power. Being in the role of a foundation leader, you have positional power, you have philanthropic power, and then you have the power that's given to you by your peers and the people who see you a certain way. And so I've learned to understand when to use or when to confront or how, but it's almost always, my initial inclination or desire is to understand the perspective of the other and why it is that they feel a certain way, or why is a policy designed a certain way. And I think having the insight helps to address the issue in the long term. So doesn't work for everybody. I understand everybody has a different tactic, but I feel much more secure in myself in being able to speak my truth in the way that I see it, and to engage and understand.
I have to tell you, I think your superpower is your curiosity. And here again, I feel like you have expanded the definition of generosity to bringing your curiosity. When you expand the definition of generosity to include curiosity, and you're meeting people who you could be really frustrated with your loving kindness and curiosity, and open yourself up to what you learn from that experience. That is a transformational way of building understanding and also building trust and belonging. We've talked about this before, but I genuinely believe your approach when things are hard, to meet it with this curiosity, loving kindness and curiosity, I think is really magic.
Yeah, well, thank you, Lisa. We're living in very polarizing times, right? Where we now have the ability to listen to only the content that reinforces our perspective and viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have so many different TV stations,
Yeah.
things that just reinforce our viewpoint. We align and we have circles that reinforce that viewpoint, and we never create the opportunity to listen to the perspective of the other. But you know, in order to try and influence others, you have to be open to being influenced by the perspective of the other, and sometimes that's a hard space to be in, right? Because look, it's much easier to hear from your peers that you're right, your perspective is correct. It is much more difficult, to hear the opposite, and then to challenge yourself, like, well, why do I think that? What can I do and say and show, those that don't understand or don't have the same viewpoint to help them to see, the world through the way that I'm observing the world. We need more of that.
Yeah, I agree. We have time for just one more question. And I want to ask you this one. What's one lesson you hope others carry forward from your journey?
Well, as I'm getting older, what I've come to appreciate is the fact that my personal journey, while it's been, filled with, challenge and adversity, I wouldn't trade it for anything else. To be able to come as an undocumented child to experience the kind of access and opportunity that I had, to now live the way that I live, by every measure, whether it's, social, economic, I've achieved the American dream, right? And within that lies this tremendous responsibility and obligation to make that real for the next generation. So if there's anything that I've learned from my experience in my life, is that I'm going to work hard and do my part to create the conditions that allowed me to have the kind of success, because it should not just be afforded to a few, but there's no reason why that can be extended to so many young people today who are struggling because the conditions aren't there for them to be successful. But the agency is there, the ability, the intellect, it's all there. That, to be where I am, like, that just gives me so much drive to make that real for the next generation. And I would hope that others feel that. I mean, that is, if you think about what's the American dream, that's the American dream, right? Is that every generation after generation who came here, who, for whatever reason, saw this as a land of opportunity, like, we need to continue to make that a land of opportunity. We need to continue to recognize that this country has been shaped by the experience and generosity and contributions and culture of so many immigrants throughout history. That's our legacy, and we need to be reminded of that. And so, when I die, I want on my tombstone to say, he fought to advance the human potential and to, help young people achieve the American dream.
Thank you. Thanks, Oscar. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So, folks, thanks for listening. We're grateful that you've joined us in community today and that you believe, just like we do, in the importance of building belonging, resilience, and justice in this region. We know it will have ripple effects across the the state and across the country and around the world. So your presence is really meaningful, and we're very grateful for it. If you'd like to get even more involved with the work that United Way of the Wine Country is doing, please join us. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast and follow us in social media. You'll find us in Facebook, and you'll find us in LinkedIn, and you'll find us in Nextdoor. We're banned from Instagram. I'll leave that to you to figure out why that might have happened. Sign up for our newsletter at our website, www.unitedwaywinecountry.org, and share our conversations with a friend. Feel free to have the same conversations that we're having here with your friends. The more of us having conversations like this, the more we'll all appreciate that we are the leaders that we're looking for. And we're just looking for a place to get started. Thanks for starting here.